2-year-old Mary Agnes Maroney disappeared in the bustling city of Chicago on a chilly day in November 1930. Her disappearance baffled authorities for 93 years, and her family members were left devastated. This case of decades-lost child is confusing. Mary Agnes Maroney's enigmatic disappearance made international news for years. False leads and pointless discoveries failed for almost a century to locate the child and reunite her with her family. But over time, the puzzle's pieces started to line up. Hello, beautiful people, and welcome back to Mystery Detective, where we explore the depths of cold and solved cases, strange mysteries, and spooky stories that will keep you up at night. In today's video, we'll talk about the lengthy search for Mary Agnes Maroney, a 2-year-old who mysteriously disappeared from her Chicago home in 1930 and was never heard from again. Mary Agnes Maroney's case remained unsolved despite numerous DNA tests, suspicious letters, sighting reports, and reported sightings until 2023, when a Californian woman came forward with the solution to the long-standing puzzle. Stay with us as we reveal the shocking details surrounding Mary's disappearance and the surprising turn of events that resulted in the resolution of her case. Mary Agnes Maroney was born to Catherine and Michael Maroney in Chicago, Illinois, on May 9, 1928. In the depths of poverty during the Great Depression, they were a family struggling to get by. Mary had a younger sister named Anastasia, who was only 11 months old at the time. Mary and her family lived in an apartment on the second floor above a supermarket at 5200 Wentworth Avenue. Michael Maroney distributed handbills to earn his meager weekly salary of only $15. The Maroneys were having a difficult time. In the midst of their financial struggles, one of Catherine Maroney's relatives became interested in the family story. This relative took the initiative to get in touch with a welfare organization, and as a result, an advertisement about their financial struggles was publicized. Shortly after, Edgar Gilpin, a self-described male nurse and philanthropist, responded to the advertisement on May 13, 1930, on a Wednesday night. He offers Michael help in the form of a suit and some shoes. Since the addresses of families in need were kept secret from the public, the family accepted the offer through the welfare organization. But due to a small error, a mysterious woman learned the Maroney family's address. They had no idea that this seemingly insignificant mistake would trigger a tragic chain of events that would alter their lives for good. On May 14, 1930, Catherine Maroney, who was 17 years old at the time, was at home by herself with Mary Agnes and Anastasia. She heard a knock at the door as she was mopping the floor. When she goes to answer the door, a nicely dressed woman who identified herself as Mrs. Henderson and claimed to be a representative of the social worker who had seen the Maroney family's advertisement for assistance, was standing at the doorstep. She had just brought inside some groceries she had bought from the downstairs grocery store for $2.55. Mary Agnes, who was typically reserved, quickly warmed up to the woman as Catherine described their family's hardship to her. The woman appeared friendly and eager to assist while listening intently. She said her aging husband had passed away, leaving her with a sizable fortune. A child like Mary Agnes was something else she mentioned wanting. She then requested that Mary Agnes be temporarily taken to California with her while assuring Catherine that the young girl would be as chubby as a butterball. Catherine struggled to overcome her unease. She politely turned down the woman's offer, and the woman seemed to have accepted the mother's decision. The woman soon left and assured Catherine she would be back the following day. Catherine asked for her name, and the woman reluctantly identified herself as Julia Otis. Julia gave Catherine $2 and 2 books before she left as a sign of support. The next day, on May 14, 1930, even though it was raining, Julia Otis went back to the Maroney's house. She brought fresh baby clothes this time for Catherine, who was at the time expecting her 3rd child. Later, it was found that Julia had bought these clothes from a department store with a brand new $50 bill. She offered to drive Mary Agnes to a clothes buy shop so she could buy new clothes and shoes, and claimed to have found her father a better job. Catherine reluctantly agreed to let Mary Agnes go with her because she was appreciative of the woman's generosity and thought of her as a blessing. Julia Otis took little Mary away and left in spite of her sobs and tantrums. The two, however, disappeared without a trace. Catherine and Michael turned to the police for assistance as they searched desperately for their beloved daughter. They searched for traces, but none were discovered. On the same evening, an elderly man in shabby clothing who claimed to be a welfare worker showed up at the Maroney home. Catherine reported him to the police because she was uncomfortable with his presence. The men tried to stop her from making the call through to the police, but failed and eventually ran away. He was never identified or found. Julia Otis was described by Catherine as a pleasant and attractive woman, around the age of 22, standing at around 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 125 pounds. She spoke with a refined voice and had visible front teeth. Julia was dressed in a gray suit, a gray lace hat, a pearl necklace, and a jeweled wristwatch when they last saw each other. At around 8 p.m. the following day, on May 16th, a letter from Julia Otis arrived at the Maroney residence. The letter was written on letterhead, and the postmark on it showed that it was delivered at 4:30 p.m. It came with a $5 bill and was delivered via special delivery. The letter read, "Please don't be alarmed. I have taken your little girl to California with me. I have hired a special nurse to care for her. We'll be back in 2 months. By that time, you will be on your feet again and will be able to care for her." She didn't even cry a bit. She is outfitted like a princess. In the meantime, I'll help all I can to get you on your feet. Don't worry about anything else. When you get this letter, we'll be on our way already. As ever, Julia Otis. The authorities examined the letter and found that there were deliberate attempts to make the writing appear illiterate. Could the letter's author have been hiding their true educational background on purpose? As word of the letter spread, witnesses soon came forward with stories of a woman who resembled Julia's description. A young girl who resembled Mary Agnes and the woman were spotted together at a store. A witness saw the woman dictating a letter to a store employee. The Morones got a second letter from someone named Alice Henderson 2 weeks later. She claimed to be Julia Otis's cousin. Alice stated in her letter that Julia had lost both her husband and her child the year before, and so, she had been craving love since her tragic loss. Alice expressed her wish for Julia to change her mind and give Mary Agnes back. She then ceased all correspondence with the family. Authorities eventually found that both letters had identical handwriting. For days after Mary Agnes was kidnapped, on May 19th, Catherine Maroney took matters into her own hands and asked a judge for a warrant, accusing Julia Otis of abducting her first fruit. Both the public and law enforcement were puzzled by this mysterious woman's abduction of Mary Agnes Maroney. In an effort to find any indication of the two boarding a train, the police searched all of Chicago's railroad stations. However, it appeared as though the two had disappeared with no single trace. A girl fitting Mary Agnes' description was spotted in Rockford, Illinois, on July 23, 1931. A 3-year-old white girl who resembled Mary Agnes in terms of tan skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes was seen in a cart being pushed by an elderly Native American woman named Martha Thompson. When the Morones were notified and showed up to identify the girl, Martha claimed that the girl had been abandoned by her mother, whose name was Florence Fuller, and that she was on her way to join a circus with the child. The young girl, according to Catherine, was not Mary Agnes. Catherine gave the girl a thorough examination. She made sure she wasn't her daughter by inspecting her teeth and body. Both parents were inconsolable when it dawned on them that the girl wasn't Mary Agnes. One thing that set Mary Agnes apart from the girl from Rockford was the red mark on her arm. The case of Mary Agnes's disappearance eventually became cold because the investigation yielded no meaningful leads. In the coming years, the Maroney family welcomed another child whom they named Catherine into the world. They then had the good fortune to welcome 5 more boys named Michael Jr., Patrick, George, Harold, and William. When other kids went missing, the media frequently ran stories about Mary Agnes, keeping her name in the public eye. When Chicago Daily News reporter Eden Wright came across a picture of the Maroney family, he noticed something important. All of the family members looked alike, which gave him the idea for a story. In an effort to get someone to recognize Mary Agnes, the Chicago Daily News worked with the California newspaper to publish photos of the Maroney family. Soon enough, a Californian man by the name of Everett McClellan came forward in 1952. The men claimed that Anastasia, one of Mary Agnes' sisters, looked so much like his wife that it might have been her picture. The woman, Mary McClellan, was 24 years old and had been adopted in 1930 by Charles and Nora Beck. The teeth, blood type, skull type, fingerprints, and handprints of Mary McClellan appeared to be identical to those of Mary Agnes. However, Mary McClellan lacked two things Mary Agnes had. Mary Agnes was born a year later than McClellan, and McClellan did not have Mary Agnes' distinctive hernia scar from a surgical procedure. The newspaper arranged a meeting between Mary McClellan and Catherine on September 4, 1952, but much to everyone's dismay, Catherine Maroney insisted that Mary McClellan was not her lost daughter. Regardless, the women developed a close bond over time. Ultimately, a DNA test carried out in 2008 after Mary McClellan's demise established that she was not Mary Agnes. Mary Agnes' parents, Catherine and Michael, were profoundly affected by the tragic disappearance of their daughter. Michael passed away in 1957 at the age of 58, leaving behind an extraordinary amount of pain brought on by the loss of his dearly loved daughter. Depression plagued Catherine for years as she was consumed by the pain of her daughter's disappearance. She was only 49 years old when she died in 1962, after she had endured her loss all the way to the end. For close to a century, Mary Agnes' case remained a mystery. When Cook County Sheriff's Detective Jose Rodriguez started looking into Mary Agnes' disappearance in 2022 and contacted Terry Arnold, the daughter of a woman he thought was the long-lost Mary Agnes Maroney, the case took a great turn. Detective Rodriguez thought Mary Agnes might actually be Terry's mother based on DNA evidence. When the detective first explained his hypothesis that Jeanette Burchard might actually be Mary Agnes Maroney to Terry Arnold, Terry was doubtful and didn't buy it. She emphasized the absence of Mary Agnes' birthmark and other distinguishing features in her mother. But Terry agreed to take a commercial DNA test in order to disprove the theory and offer concrete proof. On October 28, 2022, the test results were received, and they produced a startling finding. Her genetic makeup, in contrast to Terry's Polish heritage, predominantly revealed Irish ancestry, which was a notable similarity with the Maroney family. The DNA test also established Terry Arnold's relationship to the Maroney family's surviving members as first-line cousins. This coincidental relationship strengthened the notion that Terry's mother was Mary Agnes Maroney. Who was she, though? Her family had been informed that Jeanette Burchard was born on April 14, 1928. She was raised by Jeanette Soleric Darris Anderson and her stepfather, Frank Darris. Detective Rodriguez did not find any obvious abnormalities in Burchard's family during his investigation. However, Terry provided a crucial piece of information. Frank Darris, Terry's step-grandfather, once told Jeanette Burchard that the woman who raised her wasn't her biological mother. Terry also claimed that her mother attempted to find out more about her true ancestry by contacting her Chicago-based cousins, but they claimed to be unaware of the situation. However, it was later discovered that before getting married to Frank Darris, the woman who raised Jeanette had a brief relationship with a man by the name of John Fahey. Fahey and the woman, along with Jeanette Burchard, were listed as residing in the same Chicago home in the 1930 census. After getting married to Darris, the family moved to Virginia in the early 1930s. Later, during World War II, they moved to Florida. Jeanette Burchard wed Edward Jennings in the 1940s, and the two of them had two children named Barbara Joan Jennings and Edward Clifton Jennings Jr. After starting her career as a nurse, Jeanette gave birth to Terry Arnold, her third child, in 1957. A few decades later, she wed Earl Burchard a second time. The Miami Dolphins were Jeanette's favorite team, and she supported them from the time they were founded in 1966 throughout her entire life. Jeanette was a nurse, but she also had a great love for animals, especially dogs and cats. She also loved opera, with Madame Butterfly being a particular favorite. According to Terry, the last time her mother visited Chicago was probably between 1989 and 1995, possibly for a funeral. She later died in Florida in 2003, and her remains were buried alongside her pets. A year later, her son, Edward Clifton Jennings Jr. died. Her daughter, Barbara Joan Jennings, soon passed away in 2006 too. Terry Arnold is, however, the only surviving child of Jeanette Burchard, and she is certain that Mary Agnes Maroney is indeed her mother, whom she knows as Jeanette Burchard. In an interview, Terry admitted that she didn't know anything about the name, Julia Otis, or how her grandmother ended up raising her mother, Jeanette Burchard. Terry is still oblivious to the circumstances surrounding this mystery. However, she acknowledged that Mary Agnes' parents never received closure or knew the truth about what really happened to their daughter and expressed sympathy and sadness for them. Terry assured the Maroney family that Jeanette Burchard, or Mary Agnes as Terry knew her, was dearly loved despite the unanswered questions. Mary Agnes Maroney was the subject of a decades-long, relentless search in 1930. The horrific chapter that has plagued the Maroney family's generations for almost a century has finally come to an end as of this year 2023. But there was still one unanswered question. Who was Julia Otis, and what motivated her to kidnap young Mary Agnes from her loving family? We will never be able to know some of these responses. Sonia Carmen Hyroke Stone was born on the 27th of May, 1951. Sonia, who originally lived in Quebec, Canada, moved to the United States in the 1970s, where she afterwards got married to Michael Stone in 1976. The union produced a female child. However, Sonia's marriage to Michael Stone did not last long, as they both divorced and went their separate ways. In the year 1980, Sonia Carmen Stone was a single mother living alone with her 4-year-old daughter while she worked for the Levi Strauss Company. On October 15, 1981, Sonia took her daughter to school and ran a few errands before she returned home. Around 12 p.m., a lady named Caroline McBride, who was a friend to Sonia Carmen, visited her at home after calling her multiple times and getting no response in return. On getting to the Carmel Point area of Monterey County, California, where Sonia lived, Caroline found the dead body of her friend, Sonia Carmen Herrick, just inside the front door that opened into her living room. 30 years old, Sonia Carmen Herrick appeared to have been sexually assaulted. She was spread out on the floor with her purse and the content in it spilling close to her body. Sonia was half-dressed and had been strangled with a pair of her own pantyhose, which was found tightly wrapped around her neck. Her shirt and jacket were torn and pulled back. A terrified Caroline placed a call through to the Monterey County Sheriff's Office, who immediately dispatched officers to the crime scene. The investigators were of the opinion that the position where Sonia was found in her home suggested that she was attacked as soon as she opened her front door to go in. They also examined Sonia Carmen's body and discovered that she had a broken left ring fingernail with blood beneath it, which indicated that she had struggled with her killer, ultimately scratching him before her death. The question of who committed such heinous crime bugged the police and the family of Sonia Carmen Herrick for years. By the next day, in a bid to find answers, the police went about the neighborhood asking questions and interviewing those who responded to the knock on their doors. While in the neighborhood, just across the street to Sonia Carmen's house, one of the detectives interviewed a neighbor whose name is Michael Scott Glazebrook. He was 25 years old at the time, and he had a 3 to 4 inch vertical scratch down his right cheek, which the detective noticed. The detective immediately asked him how and when he got the scratch. Glazebrook, however, made inconsistent statements. He told the detective he got it from cutting plexiglass in his garage, while he told his parents that he got it in a fight at Monterey Peninsula College, where he schooled. Due to his inconsistency, Michael Scott Glazebrook was charged with Sonia Carmen's death in 1982. But when the case went to trial in 1983, the jury came back with a 9-3 not guilty verdict, which made the district attorney's office decide not to retry the case, even though a retrial was possible, regardless of the jury's decision. Michael Scott was, however, discharged and acquitted. With no significant DNA technology in the 1970s, the case could not be pursued and it went cold for 39 years. In the year 2020, detectives at the Monterey County Sheriff's Office and Deputy District Attorney Matt L. Huro re-examined the Sonia Carmen Stone's case. They found out that there were several pieces of evidence in Sonia's case file that could be now tested utilizing modern DNA technology. These pieces of evidence, including the DNA found under Sonia's broken fingernail and right breast, were sent to the Department of Justice DNA laboratory for testing. Since Michael Scott Glazebrook was the #1 suspect on the list of the investigators in 1981, detectives got a search warrant for a new sample of his DNA. They were able to obtain a new DNA profile easily because Michael Scott Glazebrook was still alive and works in Monterey County. After the DNA sample from Sonia Carmenstone's crime scene was tested and compared with the DNA sample gotten from Michael Scott Glazebrook, it immediately came out as a match. Detectives then conducted surveillance at Michael Scott Glazebrook's residence in the city of Seaside. Around 8 p.m. on the 14th of August 2021, Glazebrook drove away from his home. He was, however, stopped and taken into custody. In honor of Stone, all detectives wore Levi's jeans during the operation to arrest Michael Scott Glazebrook. After an 8-day jury trial in 2023, Glazebrook, who is now 67 years old, was convicted of the murder of Sonia Carmenstone and will be sentenced in April, possibly facing a potential lifetime prison sentence without the possibility of parole. Following Glazebrook's convictions, Sonia Carmen Hiroke Stone's daughter, who is now 44 years old, said, "It's been a day that we have been waiting for a really long time. Sonia was a wonderful woman and we're so happy to see justice for her." On April 29, 2017, Lyon County deputies were called to investigate the discovery of a skull in the 2000 block of Road 145 in Neosho Rapids, Kansas. The skull was found on the west side of the river, near the banks. The person who found it had gone to the river to check the water level after recent rainfall when they noticed the skull. Further investigation led to the discovery of additional remains, including a fitted bedsheet, comforter, and a digital watch, all inside a lawn trash sack. Although the sack was tied at the top, animals had managed to tear into it and access the remains. Lyon County Sheriff's detectives took over the case and conducted an autopsy. The autopsy revealed that the man had scoliosis, a curvature of the spine. It was determined that he was middle to late-aged and approximately 5 to 5 inches tall. The man's death was estimated to have occurred between 2013 and 2016, but the cause of death remained unknown. In August 2017, the details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. Despite extensive efforts, including DNA analysis conducted by the FBI laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, the identity of the deceased remained a mystery. Detective Sergeant Travis Mischel of the Lyon County Sheriff's Office and his team worked tirelessly over the years to identify the Neosho Rapids John Doe. In 2022, Lyon County deputies partnered with Arthrum, a forensic laboratory, which provided new leads for the investigation. In March 2024, Lyon County detectives contacted a potential relative of the unknown man, leading to the identification of the deceased as Randy Bruce Clayton. Randy was born on October 12, 1953 and was originally from the Phoenix, Arizona area but had been living in Oklahoma. Surprisingly, Randy had never been reported missing. Colby L., Arthrum's director of operations, emphasized the significance of maintaining hope. He highlighted the accessibility of technology to aid in resolving cases like this one, pointing out that the primary obstacle currently is funding, which is gradually improving. Colby stressed the importance of advocacy for those who are unable to provide financial support. He emphasized the value of advocating for innovative technologies to assist in bringing closure to such cases. The investigation into Randy's case remains ongoing. Today's case takes us to Essex, England, home to Jennifer Cronin and her daughter Susan. Jennifer was utterly devoted to her family. She was glamorous and sociable, kind and gentle. She shared a close bond with her daughter Susan, and the pair adored each other. In 1990, Susan met Kieran Lynch. Susan was a trainee hairdresser, and in her late teens, Kieran, a bricklayer and builder, was 3 years her senior. For Susan's friends, they said he appeared to worship the ground she walked on, and they were seemingly the perfect couple. It was very important for Susan that her new husband got along with her parents, and luckily he did. The couple went on to have 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly. The girls were incredibly close to their grandparents and saw them at least twice a week. Matilda would describe her dad saying that when she was little she thought he was a generous and amazing father, but there was a different side to his personality. Deeply competitive side with him, always needing to be the best at absolutely everything and having a desperate need to control and give off an image of a picture-perfect family. He would say that he worked hard to keep up with his daughter's lifestyles and provide for his wife, But Susan said he really struggled to cope with stress and that he found it hard to express his emotions in a way that was healthy, and as a result it would often come out in anger with Kieran destroying and breaking things. As time carried on, things did not appear to get better. Susan said his reactions would become bigger and more aggressive, especially when alcohol was involved. One of their daughters said that she had vivid memories of screaming and shouting and plates being smashed. The day after an outburst, he would apologize and try and excuse his behavior. Like many who suffer from domestic abuse, Susan said she was ashamed and embarrassed and didn't want to tell anyone what was happening to her. One of their daughters would later say, "We weren't able to let the dog outside or anything. I was just really frightened. We had a strange relationship. If I called in sick at work, he would text saying, 'Are you not at work?' I knew he was driving around. Me and my mom had a really close relationship. My dad was quite violent towards me and my mom. If he would go for my mom, I would step in. I felt very protective over my mom." His personality flicked. One minute he'd be fine, and the next he would not be okay. In 2015, the changes in Kieran were also becoming apparent to Susan's friends, with one of them saying he appeared to be withdrawn and more gaunt. He was fitting an extension for her at the time, and sometimes he would fail to turn up for work. To Susan's shock, when a credit card bill arrived, for a card that was usually reserved for big purchases, Kieran had run up a bill of about £3,000 by withdrawing money from various cash points. Susan questioned him, but he became immediately defensive and hostile, causing the tensions within the household to escalate. Things became even more serious when Susan picked up his work clothes to do a load of washing. In his pocket, she found a small straw and some cocaine. In a text message, she said to him, "No one or nothing makes you choose that shit. You choose that over your family." Kieran replied, "Please don't tell the girls it's drugs." His erratic and volatile behavior continued. On one occasion, Susan and Kieran were at home. He held a knife to his wife's throat and threatened to take both of their lives in a murder-suicide. Susan said the ordeal felt like it went on for hours. On another occasion, the loft had been rigged with a noose. In a series of text messages, Susan told him that she wished she could turn back the clock, but it was clear that they wanted different lives. They decided to separate in November 2016, and Kieran left the family home and moved back in with his parents. After 24 years of marriage, it was a difficult choice, but Susan knew she had to protect her daughters. With Kieran gone, the tension eased, and things felt lighter and calmer. It was a chance for Susan to take some much-needed time for herself and relax with her children. Susan said that it appeared that Kieran had got himself back on track, but this would all change when she moved on. After an incredibly stressful and difficult time with Kieran, things did begin to look up for Susan when she met a man called Mike. They had taken their relationship slowly, but over time she began to talk to him about her ex, the trouble she had with him and how difficult things had been. She wanted to have a clean break and a chance to start again with someone new. This also meant she had to tell Kieran and start divorce proceedings. Susan sent him a text message asking if they could meet up at McDonald's at 6:30 p.m. Kieran agreed, and knowing that Kieran was volatile and unpredictable made an already difficult situation significantly harder. Surprisingly, however, Kieran seemed to take the news of her wanting a divorce well, with Susan describing the conversation as amicable. He later sent her a text message saying, "I'm glad you have found someone." She replied saying she hoped he would find someone too. Despite, on the face of it, taking the news of the divorce well, Kieran had actually done anything but. The following day, he sent her a series of text messages. Susan responded. The situation continued to get worse. Susan also called Kieran's cousin Lisa, who soon arrived and could hear him destroying things. Kieran appeared with a hammer in one hand and a drill in the other and told Lisa to leave it alone, saying that the situation had nothing to do with her. Lisa said it didn't seem like the Kieran she knew. He soon drove away and the police arrived not long after. The two police officers went into the house with Lisa and her husband, and Susan explained the messages that she had been receiving from Kieran. Before long, Kieran was back. He got out of his vehicle and began screaming and shouting that he was going to kill Susan. The police went out into the streets and Kieran said, "You're going to need more than two of you to get me in the car." He was subsequently arrested and led away in handcuffs. He was arrested on 3 counts: possession of an offensive weapon, threats to kill and criminal damage. The threats to kill allegation based on his text message saying he would rather have her killed was argued to possibly be hypothetical. As for possessing an offensive weapon, as Kieran worked as a builder, he had various equipment in his van, including the hammer, so in order for that to go ahead it needed to be proven he was unlawfully possessing it at that time, which they couldn't do. Therefore, he was charged with criminal damage. He denied the allegation at Southend Magistrates Court on January 29, 2018, and he was scheduled to stand trial on the 29th of March. He was released with the conditions that he not go onto Susan Street and he was to have absolutely no contact with her. Susan called him being charged with criminal damage a farce, saying that she could not believe that that was what he was being charged with. It was around this time that one of their daughters said she started feeling incredibly scared, saying that she felt the police were not taking their fears seriously. Just 12 hours after his release on bail, another call would come in to the police. A mental health team alongside police officers were sent out to speak to him, but when they arrived, he said he was fine, so he was told to contact his GP, and that was it. Despite the conditions of his bail, very clearly saying he was to have no contact with Susan at all, he paid no attention to this. He called her and turned up at her house, leaving her incredibly fearful as to what he might do next. He lied to people and said that Mike, Susan's partner, had been sending him gloating messages about his love life with Susan. He also sent what initially appeared to be a series of random letters and numbers to his daughter. When she asked what it was, he said it was the registration number of Mike's vehicle. She asked why he was sending it to her, and he replied, "He needs to speak with me. Okay? Tell her and her boyfriend." The incessant messages to Susan continued, "You and the girls have everything. I will always have my memories. Have you forgot? Not money, I suppose. Thanks for everything. A true lady. Enjoy." It was absolutely terrifying for Susan and frightening for her to even have her children at home alone. He would make 80 calls a day and refuse to stop contact. As he failed to adhere to the conditions of his bail, Susan contacted the police again. Susan's mother, Jennifer, also became frightened and asked her daughter if she had been to her house on Boyce Green and used the hose to add more water to her pond. Susan hadn't. She believed it was Kieran, doing it as a way of taunting them by showing them how close he could get. 7th, 2018. Mike phoned Susan, saying he could see a man going into their garage. He then headed upstairs to look at him out of the bedroom window, whilst trying to stay hidden behind a curtain. He could see a silver van parked in the driveway, and Susan asked him to read out the registration number, and then begged him to stay inside. The van then drove off. About 10 minutes later, Mike went into the kitchen and there was no electricity. The police later arrived and it was discovered that the electric had been cut. Kieran sent gloating texts saying, "I hope your day's been great, honey," with 3 kissing emojis. Kieran's harassment continued to escalate and he would call Susan incessantly, refusing to move on. The police still hadn't acted even though they had said they would arrest him. Detective Superintendent Stephen Jennings, the lead for stalking and harassment for Essex Police, who was not involved in the case but spoke about it in a documentary, would later say that as the police received hundreds of calls per day and no direct threats of violence had been made, it was deemed that there was not much risk to Susan, so staff were not deployed. He would add that in hindsight there was a failure to see this for what it was: stalking. Susan said, "Each time I called, someone came to take a statement. It would take hours. They would promise they'd get it sorted and then nothing ever came of it. Each time I called, it was as if it was an entirely new case." So the police never put a full picture together of how badly things were escalating. Basic things like filling in a form to record the presence of children in the home, which should have prioritized our case, and had it escalated to a more serious level, wasn't done. On the 11th of March, Kieran made an internet search for the most flammable liquids. The following day, Susan's house phone rang with one of her daughters answering it. It was Kieran. His daughter said the police were out looking for him and his response was to laugh. He then, for the first time, extended the threats to his child by telling her he would her up. Kieran was added as wanted to the police national computer. Officers were dispatched to try and find him, so the first place they tried was his address at Chuck's Road in Canvey, but he wasn't there. As the search for him continued, it was advised that their daughters should not stay at the house, so one went to a friend's house and another went to Jennifer's. Jennifer and her granddaughter watched television together before heading to bed. When the lights in the house were turned off, the phone immediately began to ring. Susan's daughter called the police before calling her mom. She was terrified that Kieran was outside. She said he was in the garden and she didn't want to get up. Jennifer had become so terrified she had locked herself in the bedroom. Susan called the police at 1:50 a.m. Susan's daughter also called the police again, and she was advised to unplug the phones from the sockets. Despite the threats being made, the police said they did not have the manpower to send a unit out. But the threats just didn't stop. Kieran's texts were still abusive and cruel, referencing Susan's late father. "Thanks you bitch. Hope you see your dad soon. Kiss." At 4:10 a.m., he sent her another text message, which was just a single kiss. Over a 24-hour period, the police had been called 6 times. 13th of March, 2018. That morning, one of the couple's daughters woke up to a text message. It was from her father, Kieran. It read, "Love you no matter what they say. Kiss." She didn't reply. Also that morning, the police had reassessed the case and it was downgraded from high risk to medium risk. Medium risk means that there may still be a risk of serious harm, but that it might not be imminent. Jennifer had locked herself in her bedroom because of how terrified she was of Kieran. Her granddaughter, who had spent the night with her, left the house and Susan knew she needed to go round to be with her mom. She let herself in and locked the door behind her. Susan encouraged her to carry on with her day, adamant that she was not going to be bullied or allow her family to be bullied by a man who simply could not accept that their relationship was over. Jennifer and her dog headed out into the garden and Susan watched them through the window as she made a cup of tea. Susan called Kieran's boss to try and find out if he knew where he was. He didn't. She then got a call from the police about their investigation. Then, without warning, at 10:48 a.m., Kieran turned up. Susan called 999. Kieran had been running with a knife as he screamed and shouted, swearing and being abusive as he ran towards Jennifer. His arm was on fire. He was also carrying a petrol can and threw liquid onto Jennifer's head, face, and back. Jennifer cowered and screamed as he continued to pour the liquid onto her. Susan ran down the road screaming for help. As she got to the bottom of the road, she turned around and noticed that he wasn't behind her. It was then that 2 neighbors came out and told her, "Don't go round there. There's 2 burned bodies." Kieran had doused himself and Jennifer in fuel and then set them alight. Susan immediately ran back to the house. Susan said she had no eyebrows, no eyelashes. All her hair was burnt off, her hands were red raw, her face, everything was sort of black. Despite her horrific injuries, Jennifer was able to speak, telling her daughter how much she loved her and that she and her granddaughters were her world. Susan later said she wasn't going anywhere and that she was going to be all right. Kieran had also been seriously hurt, suffering major burns across his body, and he had ended up slumped against the wall in the garden. Susan described him as red raw and struggling to breathe. She said, "Realized he was sitting absolutely burned. I did get up and scream at him and what he's done to me and the girls." The police, fire, and ambulance service were quick to arrive on scene alongside the air ambulance that landed at the local golf course. Kieran was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and he and Jennifer were taken to hospital. It was later discovered that Kieran had bought a bucket and jerry can before going to a petrol station to buy fuel. 2 hours after the attack, Susan was taken in for questioning. Staff at the hospital told Susan that Kieran was not going to survive the night, as the extent of his injuries were too severe, after having 97% burns across his body. For Kieran's daughters, it was an absolutely impossible situation to be in. One of their daughters said that he was still her father, and she wanted to be able to say goodbye to him, tell him that she loved him, and that she wished it hadn't come to this. Kieran Lynch died that evening. A toxicology report found that he had both alcohol and cocaine in his system. Jennifer was taken to Broomfield Hospital's burns unit and was admitted into intensive care, with burns across 33% of her body. The burns were mostly on her upper torso and head. She was taken into surgery, but reconstruction was impossible due to the nature and extent of her injuries. It was decided that she would be instead given end-of-life care. She held on for 17 days. But tragically, on the 30th of March 2018, at 1:32 p.m., Jennifer Cronin died surrounded by her family. Dr. Benjamin Swift carried out a postmortem at the hospital, confirming that her cause of death were complications from the horrendous burns she had suffered. For Susan, this had purposely been done by Kieran purely to hurt her, knowing how close she was to Jennifer and how much they meant to each other. Monday, January 21st, 2019. A week-long inquest was opened at County Hall Chambers in Chelmsford. Susan said that when she went into the inquest, she was just angry with Kieran for what he had done. But as the facts emerged about how poorly it had been handled by the police, she became more angry with them. I felt like he was upping the ante in what he was doing. Each incident I reported, he wasn't arrested, she said. Susan's partner Mike also spoke about the stress and worry caused by Kieran's behavior. The jury at the inquest concluded that Jennifer had been unlawfully killed and that Kieran had died by suicide. It also found that poor communication by the police had factored into it. Susan gave a statement saying, "It's been a horrific year, really, to be pushed from pillar to post, and we felt all along that we weren't being listened to and that things weren't being done as they should be, and now that result means we can see it in black and white. We tried our hardest to get them, the police, to sit up and take notice, but couldn't understand why nothing was being done. I would hope the police have learnt from these mistakes. It doesn't bring my mom back or their dad, but things definitely need to be looked at. They are supposed to protect and serve the public, and they certainly didn't do that for us." For Susan, the failures by the police to act on the concerns about Kieran meant that it could have been prevented. The police didn't protect us. We were shouting and screaming and waving it in their faces, and the failings were shocking. If they had done their job properly, my mom would be here. The inquest found 5 areas of police failings that were contributing factors to Jennifer's death, and that attempts to arrest him weren't made in a timely and efficient manner. Following the findings of the inquest, several officers received management action training and record to record keeping and processing of information. No police officers faced misconduct action. In March 2019, the Independent Office for Police Conduct found there had been a lack of positive action from officers, as well as a lack of clarity over domestic abuse offenses. A domestic homicide review was also set up, and the police were criticized for allowing Kieran to not be identified as the danger he posed, or that his behavior amounted to stalking. It also said there was an absence of proactive responses to breaches of bail and a lack of understanding of which officers should be responsible for this. It was later announced that Susan was taking legal action against the police, hoping they would accept legal liability for their failures in her dealings with them. She said, "Would just like the police to take proper responsibility. I feel so strongly that this could have been prevented if the police had done their jobs properly. I was going through hell and it just wasn't taken seriously. I've been left a single mom with no help and no family left. It's not easy. I'm disgusted by the failings of the police in all honesty." Detective Superintendent Stephen Jennings said, "I have met Susan Lynch and apologized to her for what happened in 2018. I have personally invited her to come and talk to our new teams. We are a far stronger force than we were 5 years ago in every way." Mike said Susan often suffers from flashbacks and wakes up screaming and crying. The absolute horror of what Susan and her family experienced is almost impossible to put into words, and the terrifying series of events that unfolded in front of her eyes are too awful to comprehend. Susan said, "Watching my mom get burned alive by my ex-husband and being helpless to intervene was exceptionally disturbing. She didn't deserve such a painful and traumatic death. Mom still had lots of years to live and plenty of love to give her grandchildren. My poor girls have got to live with this forever. Thankfully, they have lovely memories of the person their dad used to be. To try and find the words to end a case like this is almost impossible. The trail of devastation and destruction left behind is quite simply unfathomable. Jennifer Cronin should still be here, enjoying life and spending time with those she loved most. Her life was ended in a way that is too horrific to even think about. And for those left behind, life will never, ever be the same. When we lose someone we love, we must hold on to those good memories and keep those happy times close and hope that with the passage of time, there will be an opportunity for healing." Emily Grace Jones was born in Bolton on the 18th of January, 2013 to parents Sarah and Mark. Mark worked as a credit manager and Sarah was a solicitor. Emily was their only child. Emily was described as being full of joy and laughter with a heart as big as her smile. She loved the great outdoors and playing sports, throwing herself into anything and everything. She was fearless and loved to go hiking and climbing as well as swimming and riding horses. Mark said his daughter was a bit of a daredevil who was sociable and outgoing. Her teacher said she was creative and loved to draw and write stories. She was very popular with those in her class and got along with everyone. Bright and hardworking, she would often joke with her teachers that she had finished her work before her classmates had even written the date. Although Mark and Sarah were no longer together, they were still on good terms and committed to co-parenting Emily. Mark would usually look after Emily on Sundays, and he and Sarah had arranged a meeting in Queen's Park on Sunday the 22nd of March 2020. That Sunday was Mother's Day and Emily had given her mother a card that morning to celebrate. At around 2:15 p.m., Emily and Mark were in the park and she was whizzing around on her scooter and her dad was encouraging her to go faster. Emily saw Sarah who was jogging and said to Mark, Daddy, I want to go to Mom." He told her she could and she set off. Emily called out to Sarah, but Sarah didn't hear her because she had headphones in and was too far away. As Emily scooted over, Mark saw a woman stand up from a bench and go towards his daughter, and Emily was suddenly on the ground, but he was unsure exactly what had happened. He assumed that she'd fallen over as he could hear her crying and that the woman was helping her up. People nearby began shouting, clearly horrified and distressed, saying that his daughter had been stabbed. The woman who had her hood up briskly walked away with a knife in her hand. Mark immediately ran over to his daughter. She had a catastrophic injury to her neck and was struggling to breathe. Her dad told her, "Just stay with me, Emily, stay with me. Don't leave me." Sarah was still in the park, but was unaware of what had happened. Mark called her and a nurse came over and quickly began to try and help Emily. She was deteriorating rapidly. One of the people in the park at the time, Tony Canty, was there with his wife and baby daughter. He ran after the woman who had been seen with Emily as she tried to flee the scene. He wasn't exactly sure what had happened or if she was armed, but continued to chase her. Tony's wife gave Mark her baby's muslin cloth to try and stop Emily's heavy bleeding. The emergency services arrived within minutes and paramedics worked quickly to try and save her. The first paramedic to get there saw Emily being hugged by her father from behind as she lay on the ground. She was bleeding heavily and unconscious. She was also in cardiac arrest. The paramedics began to administer CPR and she was given adrenaline before being loaded into the air ambulance. As he pursued her, Tony's wife told him that the woman had a knife on her, but he still bravely carried on, disregarding his own safety, instead prioritizing the safety of others. He knocked the woman to the ground and sat on her to stop her from running away, and also called 999, telling the operator, "There's been an incident at Queen's Park in Bolton and a child's bleeding." He also spoke about the woman. "I don't know what she's saying. She is agitated." His wife also heard the woman saying that she no longer needed injections. Tony had killed her family and that he was killing her. Tony told her, "You're not well. The police will help you." The woman said to Tony, "I don't need you to tell me to be calm." He proceeded to keep hold of her until the police arrived and took over. A cordon was put up around the area and specialist officers were on the case, trying to build a clear picture of what had happened. Emily was taken to Salford Royal Hospital and the helicopter landed there at 3:27 p.m. She was ventilated and given blood transfusions but remained in cardiac arrest. Tragically, at 3:56 p.m., all the attempts to restart her heart had failed and Emily's time of death was called. This was now a murder inquiry. The following day, Sarah was given the awful task of formally identifying her daughter's body. Postmortem was carried out and it was determined that Emily had died from an incised wound to the neck. In a statement, her family said, "We are beyond devastated that this random act of violence means we will never get to see our beautiful little girl grow up into the wonderful young lady she was showing such promise of becoming. It is truly heartbreaking to wake up to a world without Emily in it and we cannot comprehend why this has happened. We would like to thank the members of the public that assisted us in the park. and express our gratitude to the emergency services for doing their utmost to save Emily's life. Community was in shock. The teachers from her school were heartbroken, and her headmistress paid tribute to her, saying, "I want you to know how much Emily was loved. She will be missed by all her friends and all the staff. Her loss has left a hole in our hearts, and the school will never be the same again." The police needed to start building a picture of their suspect. The woman they had arrested was 30-year-old Altiona Scana, and she was detained under the Mental Health Act. Dr. Suhanthini Farrell was the on-call doctor when she was arrested. She was said to be cooperative and calm, and when asked about her mental state, she responded, "Not very well." She said she couldn't remember anything about the park, but Dr. Farrell said this appeared to be because she didn't want to discuss it, not because she couldn't remember it. Dr. Farrell also described her as emotionless. When she was arrested, she was found to have wire tied around her toes. A police officer asked what this was for, and Altiona responded that it was to help her with her emotions. Before it was taken off, she tried to tighten it around her toes again. A doctor would later say that this was indicative of a psychotic action. Altiona Scana had been born in February 1990 in Albania. According to Altona's sister, their father had got into debt, and in February 2012, Altona was forced to marry the man he owed money to, and they then moved to Kuwait. She fled in September the following year and returned to Albania. In 2014, she left Albania again, and this time headed to Frankfurt, Germany. And on the 11th of August, her sister paid for her to go to the United Kingdom. She was taken via Italy and France and entered the UK in a lorry 2 days later, on August the 13th. She had made an application to the Home Office for asylum, but this was rejected in June 2018. An appeal was made, and this decision was reversed, and she was then given a residency permit to remain in the country until the 28th of November, 2020, and then leave to remain until November 2024. This was despite her later admitting to doctors that she had lied in her application and falsely said she was a victim of sexual exploitation, something she had said to improve her chances of being allowed to stay in the country. The Home Officers not revealed if they were informed that she had admitted to lying. In March of 2015, her mental health was not in a good place, and she was assessed by a doctor who determined that she had post-traumatic stress disorder, and she was subsequently referred for treatment. However, she failed to turn up for her cognitive behavioral therapy session, and her case was therefore closed. Just a few months later in July, Altona had grabbed a knife and believed she was going to be attacked. Her sister reported it, and Altona was sectioned and admitted to Royal Bolton Hospital for treatment. She was diagnosed with acute schizophrenia-like psychotic symptoms. She believed her neighbors were planning to hurt her by using her electricity. When she was granted leave by the hospital, she would run away on several occasions. After refusing oral medication, she was given antipsychotic medications via injection. She did lodge an appeal against being sectioned, but on the 20th of August 2018, it was determined that she was well enough to be released, as the feelings she had about her neighbors trying to hurt her had reduced, as had her feelings of being persecuted. As part of being released, she was visited by mental health workers between 1 and 2 times a week. Tayan had complained about the injections of the antipsychotic medications, saying she didn't like the side effects. In November 2015, she was taken off the medication, but her mental health would soon deteriorate again. On the 9th of December, she told doctors at the Salford Royal Hospital that she was having auditory hallucinations on a daily basis. It was reported that Altona's own mother did not believe she should be on medication and didn't agree with the decision to prescribe her any. In January 2017, she refused to let her care coordinator come into her property and did not attend a scheduled meeting. Her sister was now greatly concerned about Altona's mental health and that she was suffering a relapse. So she arranged for a team to visit her again on the 13th of February. But before this could happen, Altiona would commit a shocking act of violence. Her mother had come to visit her, and she had found that Altiona had been trying to hurt herself. Altiona led her mother upstairs and proceeded to chain the door shut. She said that once she killed her mother, everything would be okay. She then attacked her with an iron, stabbed her hand, and was only stopped when a friend intervened. She was subsequently arrested and detained under the Mental Health Act. It later emerged that she had disconnected the boiler, removed the light bulbs in the property, and got rid of her television. She would again leave the hospital without permission, and at 5 a.m. went to her friend's house and demanded to speak to their 13-year-old daughter. She was armed with a knife that she had taken from a restaurant. The mother refused to let her inside, and when she asked Eltiona about what she had done to her hair, Altiona said she had cut her hair off rather than cutting off people's heads. She was returned to the hospital by police, and on the 4th of May, she was deemed fit for release. All appeared to go quiet. That was until March of 2018. Altiona said she was not feeling well and requested to go back on injections. She said she was having hallucinations again. The following year, she has to be taken off the injections and be on oral medication instead. She remained stable and her family's support appeared to help with her paranoia, although she continued to avoid busy places and wore sunglasses to avoid eye contact. Her last visit with a mental health worker was on the 11th of March 2020, after having none for 3 months. It was so uneventful that the worker didn't even make any notes. Just 11 days later, she would take Emily's life. On the morning of the 22nd of March 2020, Eltiona had left her home at around 1 p.m. and headed into Bolton Town Center. She purchased a pack of 3 crafting knives from a pound shop, later telling a psychiatrist that she had bought them with the intention of killing someone. She then went to Queen's Park. A witness later reported that he had seen a woman sitting on the ground with her legs crossed next to a bench and added that she appeared to be agitated. He noted that she had a vacant look on her face, which also caught his attention. He continued to watch her for around 4 minutes, but as she didn't say or do anything, he headed home. As Emily headed to Sarah, she went past the bench Altiona was sat on with her hood pulled up. Out of nowhere, she stood up, grabbed Emily into a headlock, and launched a ferocious attack against the little girl, stabbing her in the neck and slitting her throat. Police went to her flat and searched it and found a load of antipsychotic medication, totaling almost a month's worth that hadn't been taken. A doctor would later say that suddenly coming off of medication could cause someone's mental health to rapidly decline within just a few days. She was charged with murder and possession of a bladed article. She was remanded in custody and scheduled to appear at Manchester and Salford Magistrates Court on Tuesday the 26th of May. As the preliminary murder hearing got underway at Manchester Crown Court, Judge Richard Mantle QC expressed his sympathy for Emily's family, saying to Mark, "I can't imagine the level of pain you and your wife are going through at the moment, and you have my personal and deepest sympathy, as well as the sympathy of everyone involved in the court's process." Mark was there for the hearing, and Eltiona appeared via a video link from Rampton Secure Hospital, a high-security psychiatric hospital where she was being held. She ended a plea of guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, and prosecutors were given 7 days to consider her plea. They eventually decided to push ahead with a murder trial. It was now time for Eltina Scana to go on trial for murder. The prosecution told the jury that it would be for them to decide whether or not this was actually a case of manslaughter or if she was using her mental health condition as what they referred to a convenient excuse for what she had done. The court heard evidence that whilst in hospital she had spoken to a nurse, and the conversation had pointed to this being something that had been planned, therefore not manslaughter, but rather a premeditated and calculated killing. It also emerged that from the middle of December 2019 to March 11th the following year, she had not had any face-to-face contact with mental health workers. In a report read out to the court, one of the doctors said that Eltona represented a very high risk of serious, potentially fatal harm to others. The court heard that whilst in hospital she had been reportedly watching a child's television program when a child who looked like Emily appeared on the screen. Eltona began to laugh hysterically. She said to a nurse at the hospital, "Like I said, it's been 3 months, what do you want me to do, cry all the time?" Later telling the same nurse it was premeditated. "I waited in a park and picked my victim. I did what I did, then tried to run away." It was noted that during these conversations she was not on her medication. The court was told that on the 30th of July, staff at the hospital had been observing what was referred to as strange behavior, with Eltona telling nurses, "Your body has gone to your soul and we're all going to die." Dr. John Crosby, a consultant psychiatrist, would tell the court that Eltona Skarner had paranoid schizophrenia and said this had caused her to suffer from delusions and lose touch with reality. He said that there appeared to be no reason for Emily being singled out by her, adding that it was his conclusion. She was in the midst of a psychotic episode when she took Emily's life. Such a terrible, rare, random attack. To my mind, I can't think of another reason why it could have occurred, he said. In a statement read to the jury, Mark said, "Do not know why this happened. Emily was simply riding her scooter to her mum. I simply can't explain it." He said that Emily was a vulnerable child full of innocence and wonder. She was just starting off on her path of life and her future was cut short. Our future has also been taken away. How can we enjoy life when the best part of it has been taken away? Evidence was given by a consultant forensic psychiatrist from the hospital where Altiona was being held, and it stated that the possibility of her being convicted of murder was not realistic. After the prosecution considered the medical evidence, it was agreed it would not be fair to ask a jury to convict her of the offense of murder. So the murder charge was withdrawn and the jury was formally instructed to return a not guilty verdict on the charge of murder. Altona Skarner was therefore convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Prosecutor Michael Brady QC told the court, "The Crown has come to the conclusion that there is no longer any realistic prospect of conviction." The judge said in his sentencing remarks, "It is obvious that nothing I can do or say can restore Emily to her family or offer any real comfort to them in their immense loss." He said he was satisfied on the basis of the evidence given that she had paranoid schizophrenia, saying that the nature and degree of it warranted her detention in hospital. Alcionis Kana will only be eligible for release after serving her minimum term and being assessed as no longer being a danger to the public. The judge added, "If you are never deemed fit for release, you will remain in hospital or prison for the remainder of your days." It was later reported that her minimum term had been increased from 8 years to 10 years and 8 months. The judge said that the original sentence had been calculated in error and added that he took full responsibility for it. After her sentence was increased, Mark said, "I will keep fighting tooth and nail for her to stay there for the rest of her life. Whether it's 10 years or 20, it won't be enough for me. As far as I'm concerned, she's a danger to the public for the rest of her life. She'd do it again to any child. I would bet my bottom dollar on that." At the inquest into Emily's death, the acting senior coroner Alan Walsh said, "In my 20 years as a coroner, this is one of the most tragic deaths that I have dealt with, and the loss of a beautiful, innocent, lively, intelligent, and lovely 7-year-old in these circumstances is an unimaginable tragedy." When talking about Altiona, the coroner Timothy Brennan said she had been deliberately masking her deteriorating condition, meaning that the mental health workers didn't know she was not taking her medication or that she was relapsing. He added that only with the benefit of hindsight could Altona's actions have been predicted. Emily's father Mark said that although he was glad the inquest was over, he disagreed with the finding. "I cannot believe he has come to that conclusion," he said. "They didn't realize the threat she posed, but it was their job to know. They may be underfunded and rushed off their feet, but they're a dangerous people. I don't think enough money goes into mental health services, but that's no excuse, especially when you're dealing with dangerous individuals. I don't feel like I've got closure. I want to change the system. It's my daughter and it's down to me to make this right." Following the inquest, Mark's lawyer said she twice told doctors that she had lied in her asylum application. She twice told doctors and police that she wanted to go home in 2015 and 2017, and the Home Office offered no explanation as to why they ignored these important clues in her presentation. A Home Office spokesperson said, "We are carefully considering the findings from the inquest and any further recommendations by the coroner." Mark said he has not forgiven Altona for what she did. "No, people say it's good for your mental health to forgive, but in this instance I'm afraid I can't. How dare she touch my daughter? How dare she put her hands on her? So no, I can't forgive her." Altona Skarner would later appeal her sentence, but this appeal was rejected. Lady Justice McCaw said that there was sufficient evidence to find Altona knew that what she did was wrong and attempted to escape detention and escape the scene. Mark said he was more relieved than happy that the appeal was rejected, saying she's a manipulative and dangerous individual, and all 3 judges saw that today. Alciona Skarner remains at Rampton Hospital, where she is being treated. Greater Manchester Mental Health NHS Trusts have been responsible for Altona's care, conducted a review. In a statement they said, "We treat incidents of this kind with the utmost seriousness and completed an internal rigorous review." Whilst this identified learning for our services, the review found there were no markers of deterioration in Ms. Garner's mental state or behavior which would have foreseen this tragic event. NHS England disagreed with the Trust's conclusion, saying that it was clear she was unwell and posed a risk to others by 2017. Their report said, Mark later demanded an apology from the Trust, saying that it was absolute nonsense. They are just trying to relinquish all responsibility, and she was their responsibility. They knew she didn't comply with oral medication, but they allowed her to take it on her own volition. That is a ridiculous thing to do. She was a ticking time bomb. I want the horrible story of what happened to my daughter to be told. It's not that I want people to feel sorry for us, but it needs to be told because it's an absolute public outrage. Following Emily's death, her school said they were going to have a memorial set up for her, and more than £11,000 was raised. The head teacher said she was blown away by the support the school had received from the community. Emily's school friends were helping to design a garden in her memory, something that would reflect Emily's love of life in the outdoors, also creating a space for people to go and remember her. Mark teamed up with the charity 100 Families, which supports relatives of those killed by somebody suffering from mental illness, to change the way patients are managed within the community. He said, in another fitting tribute to Emily, her mother Sarah launched a GoFundMe to raise money for Bolton Lads and Girls Club, with the aim of helping children have support and access to various opportunities. It raised nearly £30,000 and was a truly beautiful way to remember Emily. For her devastated family and those left behind, life will never be the same. Emily was a bright and kind little girl with her entire life ahead of her. A life that would have undoubtedly been filled with joy and love and immense promise. On what was a Sunday that should have been filled with joy and happiness, her life was taken in the most appalling of circumstances. And the aftermath of her death is quite simply devastating. As Mark and Sarah said, Emily was the beat in our hearts, the spring in our step, and the reason we got up every morning. Garland, Texas, November 2011. 54-year-old Kelly Martin and her husband Don, like many, were decorating the family home, ready for the festive period. Don was a police officer and Kelly a teacher. They had been together since college and had 2 daughters, Lauren and Caitlin. While grabbing boxes down from the attic, Kelly missed a step on the ladder, tripping and falling. She instantly felt a twinge in her back. The pain was bad, but she got through the holidays hoping it was just a pulled muscle or a trapped nerve, and that it would pass. But when it became obvious it was far more than this, she made a trip to her doctor. This small misstep on the ladder had resulted in a herniated disc in her back. Physical therapy, painkillers, muscle relaxers weren't enough. And eventually her doctor recommended a fantastic neurosurgeon new to the area, Dr. Christopher Dunch. Incredibly well-respected, highly sought after and praised by many of the doctors, it was a no-brainer to pay him a visit. Dr. Dunch put Kelly at ease right away, saying it was no problem at all, a very routine surgery, likely no more than 45 minutes. In fact, it was about the simplest operation a neurosurgeon could perform, he said. Have you ever had any bad outcomes or deaths on your surgery? Kelly asked. He replied, no, knock on wood. And with this, her surgery was scheduled for March 2012. The day came around and Don waited patiently in the waiting area. But the 45 minutes drive Dunch said it would take would soon pass. Then it was an hour, then an hour and a half. It was almost at double the time now, and Don was starting to get worried. He asked one of the nurses to go and check, and about 20 minutes later drive Dunch came out. He said the surgery went well and Kelly was moving around but was in a lot of pain, so he got the medicine. He said she may have to go up to the ICU and stay overnight, but she was going to be okay. Don was told he couldn't go and see his wife as they were still working on her, a phrase that sent a shiver down his spine. Don said something in his gut was telling him it was all off. He called Lauren and Caitlin and said they should come up. 2 hours later, Don and his daughters were still waiting around and panicking. They suddenly saw the ICU physician, Dr. Dunch, and the anesthesiologist walking towards them. The looks on their faces told the story before they even opened their mouths, the words no one wanted to hear. We did everything we could. Kelly Martin had died. How had such a simple, routine operation gone so devastatingly wrong? Don said Dr. Dunch never said a word, not even looking at the three of them. They were told by the ICU physician that it had been a medical miscalculation. Records later showed that during the surgery her blood pressure had plummeted and she went a gray color. As she regained consciousness after the surgery, she began to hit her legs, which had turned an odd color with splotches on them. Kelly had become so agitated. The nurses had to sedate her. She never woke up. Don said it was pure misery. My world just ended right then and there. He started rocking back and forth so enraged with emotion he almost lunged at them. I knew something was wrong and I wanted to hurt him, he said of Dr. Dunch. Caitlin said it was like being in slow motion, and as they said their goodbyes to Kelly, Don asked for some scissors so he could keep a little piece of her hair. They all drove home in silence. The medical examiner confirmed that Kelly had bled to death internally, after one of her arteries was completely sliced. Don, Lauren and Caitlin all had a terrible feeling they weren't getting the full story. Something about Dunch was not sitting well with them and they wanted answers. But what had happened to Kelly Martin was sadly just the beginning, and soon a huge can of worms would start to open. But as always, sometimes you must go backwards slightly to move forwards. Born in 1971 in Montana, Christopher Daniel Dunch had originally set his sights on playing football. One of his teammates remembered him as not being very good at following orders and struggling with the most basic of drills, but someone that came back every practice trying to get it right. He made multiple transfers and moved around so much that he was told this had taken away his eligibility to play professionally. He realized his football dream was over and suddenly made a drastic change. He abruptly switched to a career in medicine. In 1995, he received his undergraduate degree from the University of Memphis before getting his MD there too. He excelled in medical school to such a point that he was allowed to join the Alpha Omega Medical Honor Society and started working with Russian scientists on research programs, gaining $3 million in funding. He started his surgical residency at the University of Tennessee and was soon running 2 labs. He was described as a charming, smooth-talking and witty guy with a glowing 12-page resume. He had many people speaking highly of him and seeking him out. But despite all of his successes and accolades, things were slowly starting to unravel, and it was becoming clear that all was not as it appeared. His resume boasted that he had earned a doctorate in microbiology from the prestigious St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, but there was no such program running at the hospital at that time. He also claimed to have gotten his PhD from the University of Tennessee Health Center, but he appears in no yearbooks from the university during that period. The school declined to verify his claims, citing a federal privacy law. Since college, he had been a drug user and a big drinker, but during his residency was when his drug use started to escalate. He was frequently taking LSD, cocaine, and illegally getting his hands on prescription painkillers. His ex-girlfriend Megan initially thought that this was just something he did occasionally, but it was clearly not the case. After a full night of drug taking, drinking vodka, and no sleep, Megan said he grabbed his scrubs and walked into work ready to talk to patients. She was horrified. His choice of drug was cocaine, although when he would come down after binges, he would rely on OxyContin, Xanax, and alcohol. Many said he would start his days off with a vodka and orange juice and a line of cocaine. One of his friends would later talk about just how out of control his drug use was, and several nurses said they saw him taking cocaine right before he went into surgery. But Dunch joked about it, calling them his neurostimulants, believing it made him better and more alert in theater. After he was reported, he was asked to take a drugs test, which he refused to do. He was subsequently sent to an impaired physician program. In a deposition, slurring and not really concentrating, Dunch pleaded the fifth over and over again when asked about using drugs whilst working with patients. Despite the complaints, refusal to participate in tests, and after completing less than 100 surgeries, whereas it is typical for a resident to perform closer to 1,000, he was still allowed to finish his residency. In 2011, he was headhunted to join the Minimally Invasive Spine Institute in North Dallas with a $600,000 advance. Not long after, he was given surgical rights at the Baylor Regional Medical Center in Plano on a $50,000 a month salary. The recommendation that landed him the job had read, Chris is extremely bright and possibly the hardest working person I have ever met," adding he had an excellent work ethic. For hospitals, surgeons are worth millions in revenue, on average about $2.5 million per year, and it is not uncommon to get operating privileges at other hospitals, hence the reason Dunge was able to get a string of these across Dallas. Only a couple of months after he had finished his training, Dunge met another surgeon called Dr. Randall Kirby, a man that would play a key role in this story. Kirby said the first conversation he had with Dunge revolved around him telling him he was the best surgeon in Dallas and the only one a patient could trust. He said he wanted to clean the town up and was quite aggressive with his delivery. Kirby was taken aback with his level of arrogance, knowing how new he was to this game. Other doctors saw the same outbursts but put his cockiness down to the fact he was just a really talented surgeon and he knew it. Opinions soon changed, however, when the only surgery he actually performed at the Minimally Invasive Spine Institute resulted in him being asked to leave. After the surgery was done, he immediately went on a trip to Las Vegas to party and left no one to look after his distressed patient. His drug use wasn't slowing down, and he would write many long emails to another ex-girlfriend and his surgical assistant Kimberly, saying some very unhinged things, likely due to intoxication. One email read in parts. In more emails he referenced his drug and alcohol abuse. These emails were full of swearing, threats, and rambling and abusive language. The emails themselves are too long to read in full, but they are interesting and present a small insight into his mind, so we have linked them in the description box if anyone wants to take a closer look. In December 2011, shortly before Kelly Martin approached him, Christopher had operated twice on a man called Ken Fennell. He was his first patient in North Texas. The surgery didn't help fix his back pain, as Dunn had operated in the wrong area, a mistake he admitted, but one he said he would correct with a second surgery. Ken, desperate to fix his pain, agreed. When Ken woke up the second time around, he described his legs as like a bonfire burning him. Something had gone wrong during the second surgery, but he had no idea what, and he left hospital relying heavily on a motorized wheelchair from that point on. Dunch's next patient was Lee Passmore, and he was actually an investigator in the Collin County Medical Examiner's office. He had undergone back surgery once before, but his pain had come back. Without missing a beat, Lee's pain specialist recommended Dr. Dunch. The surgery was booked right away. A vascular surgeon called Mark Hoyle assisted with the operation. Dr. Hoyle watched in horror as Dunch began to cut out a ligament around the spinal cord that should never have been touched. Right away, Lee started bleeding so profusely Hoyle said the operating room was like a lake of Dunch. Not only left some hardware in Lee's spine, he also stripped the screw so it could not be moved. Unable to watch anymore, Dr. Hoyle said he blocked the incision area to try and stop Dunch from carrying on. "We need to talk about this," he said, locking eyes with Dunch. "That's dangerous. Even that attitude is dangerous. I've done 5,000 of these and I've never seen this done before." For the arrogant and careless surgeon, it was not enough to stop him. Hoyle said he left the operating room and vowed to never work with the surgeon ever again. Lee Passmore did survive the ordeal, but lives with chronic pain and has a lot of trouble walking and balancing. The next patient to have his life irreparably changed was Barry Morguloff. Spending his life unloading trucks, his back was now in pain all the time. The only recommendation he got was Dr. Dunch, but Barry wasn't sure. Nervous about getting surgery, and he spent hours poring over reviews about him and all his awards and accolades. Barry set up a meeting with the surgeon and clicked with him right away. He said he felt calm seeing how confident Dr. Dunge was. He said he was a very charming and disarming guy, a loving family man it seemed. "Phenomenal, great guy, loved him," Barry said. In January 2012, Barry was wheeled into surgery. The vascular surgeon assisting Dunch was none other than Dr. Randall Kirby. Dr. Kirby said of the operation, "In the spectrum of what a neurosurgeon does for a living, doing this procedure is probably the easiest thing that they do on a daily basis." Kirby watched as Dunch went right in without using the proper tools, grabbing at things that he shouldn't have been and haphazardly blundering around. Kirby argued with Dunch before changing tack and politely offering to take over the surgery, but Dunch insisted he knew what he was doing. Kirby left, but he was unable to shake this feeling that he had about Dunch and had had since the day he first met him. Barry woke up from the surgery in agony, a pain unlike anything he'd felt before. It would turn out that there were bone fragments that had been left in Barry's spinal canal. Another surgeon would later try and repair the damage, but Barry has to walk with a cane now, and his doctor said one day he will end up in a wheelchair. At one point, Barry was so depressed and sick that he contemplated taking his own life, believing it was the only way the mental and physical pain would end. Fortunately, his wife and children were able to pull him out of the dark place, and he began some intensive therapy. Dunge's childhood friend and now roommate Jerry Summers then approached him to perform a surgery on his back too. He had a herniated disc. The pair would often go out partying together, and Jerry even had access to Dunge's credit cards. To ask his good friend to do this simple surgery seemed like a given. The trust was already there, and Dunge was often talking about how highly in demand he was. But for Jerry, the dream situation would quickly turn into a nightmare. In surgery, he damaged Jerry's vertebral artery, and the bleeding just wasn't stopping. 2 liters of blood was soon lost. Dunge packed the area with so much anticoagulant that it squeezed Jerry's spine. When Jerry woke up, he said he couldn't feel anything. He had no sensation in either of his arms or legs and was now completely paralyzed. Would later require 24/7 round-the-clock care. Lying in the ICU, knowing that he was never going to recover, he turned to his girlfriend and said, "Kill me, I want to die." Dunge never once came to see his friend, see how he was, or even explain what had happened. In a depressed rage, Jerry told the nurses that Dunge had been taking cocaine the night before he performed the surgery. He later admitted he had just made this up. But knowing his friend and his drug usage, he felt it was fairly educated assumption. His claim was taken seriously, and Dunge was ordered to take a drugs test. The test would never happen, as Dunge claimed he got lost on his way there. He did pass a separate psychological evaluation, and just 3 weeks later, he was allowed to start operating again, but was instructed to stick to minor procedures. But after this, we come back to Kelly Martin's case. She would be his next patient. After Kelly died, officials ordered Dunge to take another drug test. This time, he took it. The first screening came back as showing it had been diluted with water, and the second, a few days later, was clean. Some while later, Lee, still struggling to work, was allowed to resign from his job at the Collin County Medical Examiner's office. But before he left, a fax came through that stopped him in his tracks. There were 2 names at the top of the first page, Kelly Martin and Dr. Christopher Dunge. He sat and read what happened to her, shocked at what he was seeing. The cogs started turning as he connected the dots between that and his own botched surgery. He went down a rabbit hole and found a few months that were not accounted for in Dunge's educational history. He said you don't get to walk away from 2 to 3 years of medical training in the middle of an internship or a residency, get to take time off and be slotted directly in the position you left in with no questions asked. Maybe that's how they do it in Tennessee. But according to my training, that's not how they do it here. Then it all just started to unravel. Administrators at the hospital put together a comprehensive review of all of Dunge's cases, and each time the same thing had happened. Patterns were showing and other surgeons were talking. Now someone was dead. This could not be ignored. After going through everything that had happened in that particular hospital alone, they determined he couldn't continue there. To the shock of the other surgeons and patients, the hospital did not fire him. Instead, they asked him to resign, remaining in good standing, with his last day being in April 2012. Through a letter, Baylor Plano said, "All areas of concern with regard to Christopher D. Dunge have been closed. As of this date, there have been no summary or administrative restrictions or suspension of Dunge's medical staff membership or clinical privileges during the time he has practiced at Baylor Regional Medical Center at Plano. The places that had asked him to leave chose to avoid the legalities of a potential wrongful termination and bad press of firing such a highly respected doctor, and instead let him quietly resign and move on with no repercussions. And as he technically left of his own choice, this meant that at least 2 facilities did not have to report him to a database run by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This database is supposed to log information about problem practitioners, warning potential employers about their histories. They also failed to report him to the Texas Medical Board. When some of his patients tried to sue him for malpractice, most of them found it virtually impossible to find attorneys willing to take on their cases. In 2003, Texas enacted tort reform which reduced the amount of damages plaintiffs could win, with the number of malpractice payouts per year dropping by more than half. In July 2012, Dunch moved right on to the Dallas Medical Center. The background check they briefly ran on him came back clean. In the same month he joined, Dunch operated on 63-year-old Floella Brown, a banker looking forward to retirement. About 30 minutes into the surgery, the bleeding was so bad that Dunch said he couldn't see her spine. "Why is it still bleeding?" he kept saying. After a few scary moments, it seemed Dunch had got it under control, but nurses in the room were concerned. Although Floella woke up and seemed fine, early the following morning she lost consciousness as pressure was building up inside her brain for reasons that no one could work out. She was in critical condition and it wasn't looking good. While Floella lay in the intensive care unit with doctors fighting to save her life, Dunch was set to go into another surgery with 71-year-old Mary Ford. Mary was very active and loved working out, but back pain was stopping her from living her life. The surgery was very simple, easily mastered by most first-year residents. Before the surgery started, nurses spotted a hole in Dunch's scrubs right at the back, showing he wasn't wearing underwear. One nurse, Kyle Kissinger, said he had seen the same hole for 3 straight days, and it was clear that Dunch wasn't even changing his scrubs between surgeries. As he stared into Dunch's eyes, he said he had pinpoint pupils and wasn't blinking. It was all very alarming. The surgery for Dunch was more of the same. The operating room staff questioned why he seemed to be drilling into random areas of her back carelessly and without paying any attention. Soon after the surgery on Mary started, Dunch turned to Kyle and said he wanted to perform a procedure on Floella called a craniotomy. This involves cutting a hole in the skull to relieve pressure on the brain. Kyle was shocked and said Dallas Medical Center did not perform these as they didn't have the proper equipment to be able to. Other people in the room were agreeing with what Kyle was saying, trying to talk him out of it. Unfortunately, he backed down. Floella was moved to another hospital, but she never regained consciousness, and her family withdrew her life support a few days later. A neurosurgeon was hired to review her case and death, and would later conclude that Dunch had both pierced and blocked her vertebral artery with a misplaced screw. He also found that he had misdiagnosed the source of her pain in the first place and was operating in totally the wrong area. This had triggered a stroke, which had ultimately claimed her life. Mary Ford woke up from the surgery, the same as the others before her, in total agony. She couldn't move her legs or feel her toes. Dr. Robert Henderson, another important person in this story, was called in to look at her case. He was an extremely talented Dallas spinal surgeon with 3 decades of experience. He pulled up her post-op x-rays and the first thing he said was, "Some kind of travesty occurred." Mary was pulled back into surgery the next day with Dr. Henderson operating. There were 3 holes in Mary's spinal column where Dunch had tried and failed to insert several screws. One screw had hit the nerves that control one leg and the bladder. Dr. Henderson then discovered that Dunch had amputated on one of her nerve roots, for reasons Henderson called inexplicable. The surgery had gone so badly and was so botched, Dr. Henderson wondered if Dunch was some sort of imposter, dressing up and pretending to be a surgeon. He could think of no other reason why this had gone so wrong. Mary Ford now relies on a wheelchair. She has never regained mobility in her legs. She said one of her biggest loves was sewing. She used to do it all the time, but as she can't pick up her foot, she can't do this anymore. "Pain is really my life," she said. Dr. Henderson was horrified and took his findings to the hospital administrators, and he and Dr. Kirby both started sharing stories. Dr. Kirby had operating privileges at over 60 hospitals across Texas, and wherever he went, someone at some point would come up to him with a story about Dr. Dunch. Thanks to the fuss the pair kicked up, hospital officials told Dunch he would no longer be able to operate at Dallas Medical Center. However, yet again, he wasn't fired or suspended. He was allowed to leave quietly. People were going in for the most simple, routine, and standard surgeries and procedures, and they were coming out worse than they went in, and in the case of Kelly Martin and Floella Brown, they weren't coming out at all. It had taken months and multiple catastrophic and fatal surgeries, but finally Dr. Dunch was reported to the state medical board. However, this was not the simple fix surgeons like Dr. Henderson and Dr. Kirby thought. It would take almost a whole year for the board to investigate. All the while Dunch was operating elsewhere. Things went quiet for a little while until December 2012. Dr. Kirby was asked to assist with a woman called Jacqueline Troy. She had had neck surgery and was now battling a severe infection. Dr. Kirby found that the surgeon who had operated on her had cut her vocal cords and one of her arteries. "Is it a guy named Christopher Dunch?" he asked. He knew the answer already, and of course the answer was yes. Dunch was finally reported to the National Practitioner Databank. But even after the report was filed, Dr. Kirby found that another hospital had given him operating privileges. Although Dunch didn't realize this, Jeff Glidewell would be his last patient. Jeff, always an outdoors-loving man, had had a motorbike accident years before, and his back and neck had never been the same. He had come across Dunch in an advert that was showing the best neurosurgeons in the Dallas area. Despite everything going wrong for Dunch's patients, it seemed he was still the talk of the town. As a superstitious man, Jeff saw 3 black cats on the way into the hospital and said his gut told him to turn around. Reassured by his wife, they carried on for the surgery. Hours later, Dunch was nowhere to be found. 3 hours after the surgery was supposed to start, Dunch finally turned up in a cab, claiming he had a flat tire. His jeans were frayed, he was sweaty and disheveled, and Jeff said he didn't look at all ready for the surgery. His bad feeling grew, but he kissed his wife goodbye and went into the operating room. At this point, unbeknownst to Jeff, the state medical board had been investigating Dunch for about 10 months. During the surgery, Dunch thought that part of Jeff's neck muscle was a tumor and stopped operating on him halfway through. He cut into Jeff's vocal cords, punctured an artery, and cut a hole in his esophagus. Dunch used a sponge to stop the bleeding and stitched Jeff back up, with the sponge still inside him. Dunch came out and told Jeff's wife Robin he had found a tumor confirmed by a quick biopsy, and therefore he couldn't possibly carry on. But there was no tumor and there had been no biopsy. Robin went in to see Jeff in the recovery room. Jeff was so distressed he couldn't swallow and breathlessly mumbled, "Where's the doctor? I can't move my arm or my leg. Something's wrong. What did he do to me?" Dunch finally showed his face, and Jeff, now battling an infection as well, said, "I can't move my arms." Dunch replied, "Well, I don't know what to tell you about that," before strolling off. None other than Dr. Randall Kirby was called in to correct the damage, and at this point he was quite literally losing his mind. How did this keep happening, and when was it going to end? On a scale of difficulty, this was about a 2 out of 10 procedure. He said this was not an operation that was performed. This was attempted murder. It was like a crazed maniac procedure. Dr. Kirby went directly to the Texas Medical Board and Robin went to the police. The officer she spoke to said they didn't have the resources to file criminal charges against a doctor. She went back to Dr. Kirby, asking if she could contact the medical board too, and a statement was drafted. Jeff Glidewell would leave the hospital months later, partially paralyzed and with only one vocal cord. He has nerve damage in one arm and can only eat small bites of food at a time. But Dunch would again move elsewhere. In May 2013, Dr. Henderson and Dr. Kirby opened up their emails to find an invite to a Meet the Specialist dinner. University General Hospital was throwing an event to welcome a new neurosurgeon joining their team, Dr. Christopher Dunch. They simply couldn't believe it. This was Dunch's 3rd hospital in 18 months. Dr. Kirby said he picked up the phone right away and called the hospital to, in his words, raise holy hell. He then sent them a 6-page letter which read in part, "Let me be blunt, Christopher Dunch, Texas Medical Board license number N8183, is an impaired physician, a sociopath, and must be stopped from practicing medicine." In the letter, Kirby told the hospital they could either address it and do something about it, or he would be calling every media outlet in Texas. With so much talk in the medical community and between family members, the stories were traveling fast. An article was published about him online referring to him as Dr. Death and quoted Dr. Kirby and all of his findings. Dunch took to the comments section to threaten Dr. Kirby if he kept talking. But in this case, there was no such thing as bad publicity because finally in June 2013, Christopher Dunch was suspended and ordered to stop operating. Dunch was able to issue some sort of appeal through a lawyer and said he didn't have the time to use drugs or drink, even if he wanted to because he was too busy. He said he was a hard worker and he even threatened to sue Dr. Kirby for slander. He claimed he was at the center of a vast conspiracy to bilk money from the hospitals where he practiced. When asked why it had taken so long for the suspension to happen, the head of the medical board said at the time, "It's not uncommon for there to be complications in neurosurgery. None of us rush to judgment that's not fair, and in the long run it can come back to be incorrect. To suspend a physician's license, there has to be a pattern of patient injury, so that was ultimately what happened, but it took until June of 2013 to get that established," he added. For Drs. Henderson and Kirby, it wasn't good enough. Dr. Henderson said the word suspended implied he might be allowed back at some point, and they couldn't let that happen. Dr. Kirby, Dr. Henderson, and another doctor contacted the district attorney, arguing that Dunch was a criminal. They got a meeting, but nothing happened. In December 2013, almost 2 years since Kelly Martin had died, the medical board permanently revoked Dunch's license. Despite his huge salary, Dunch was now in dire straits financially. He had to file for bankruptcy, owing more than $1 million, and leave Texas, moving in with his parents in Colorado. He would come back and forth to see his 2 young sons, but it appeared the relationship with his girlfriend Wendy had fallen apart too. A month after moving, he was pulled over by police in the early morning hours. He was driving on the wrong side of the road with 2 flat tires. As soon as they spoke to him, the smell of alcohol was strong and empty bottles littered the car floor. Dunch was arrested for a DUI and ordered into rehab. In March 2014, police were called in again to a bank in Dallas, after people saw a man with blood on his hands and face, banging on the doors and trying to get in. It was Dunch. He was wearing his scrubs and was incoherent, saying something about his family being in danger. He was swiftly taken to a psychiatric hospital. After his father had sent him some money, he was caught in a Dallas Walmart, filling a cart with almost $1,000 of watches, sunglasses, computer equipment, and cologne. He bagged them up to hide them, before picking out some clothes and putting them on in the dressing room. He then headed right for the front door but was stopped by security and arrested for shoplifting. His life was out of control and the wheels were starting to come off. Later that year, Bila Plano was told a lawsuit had been lodged against them by Ken Fennell and Lee Passmore, swiftly followed by Maria Ford and Barry Mergeloff. Bila Plano described this as extremely frustrating and difficult, adding that a lot of what had been said about them was misleading, and that they never knowingly allowed one person to compromise the level of quality care they pride themselves on. Jeff Glidewell, still fighting to accept his life was now what it was, but still wanting justice, made a call to a judge with everything he knew about Dunch. This would finally help bring the case back to the district attorney's attention and get the ball moving. We now meet someone else vital in bringing this case to a conclusion. Michelle Shugart, the assistant district attorney. The case instantly piqued her interest as in her 13 years with the Dallas DA's office, she had never prosecuted a doctor. In fact, from looking at other cases like this, it seemed that no one had ever prosecuted a surgeon for what they had done in the operating room. It would become a case of thirsts for many reasons. She began researching everything she could on Dunch, and it was staggering just how much was out there about him. She issued 800 subpoenas and spoke to over 100 people in person. In July 2015, 46-year-old Christopher Dunch was arrested on 5 aggravated assault charges, 1 count of injury to an elderly person, Mary Ford. He was also accused of maiming 3 patients and causing the deaths of at least 2. He was taken into custody and denied all the allegations. He was officially charged and pleaded not guilty. In Texas, the charge of injury to an elderly person carries a potential life sentence, but there were only 4 months left before the statute of limitations ran out. This was the big charge they were pushing to take to trial, as, for various reasons, if they could obtain a conviction for this, it would be worth more in terms of years than any of the other charges. One lawyer said it's not worth an attorney's time and energy to take on a malpractice case. The outcome, sadly, would just not be worth it. The prosecution knew this was a tough case, but their goal was to get a sentence long enough to ensure he would never be able to practice medicine again. To the relief of the prosecution, Dunch was criminally charged in the maiming of Mary Ford, and this was the charge that went to trial. Dunch opted not to testify in his own defense. Despite the fact they were only focused on Mary's case, they still had a huge amount of people that were willing to testify against him to prove his negligence in the years before he even met Mary. Doctors Randall and Henderson took to the stand, as did Jerry via a video link from his home. Mary herself also testified. The prosecution said it was obvious he had intentionally, knowingly, and recklessly harmed up to of his patients, although we know there were many more people affected. Jeff Cheney woke up from his operation to find out that Dunch had removed part of his spinal cord by mistake, paralyzing the entire right side of his body. Jackie Troy found herself unable to talk as Dunch had paralyzed her vocal cords. Philip Mayfield paralyzed from the neck down. Marshall Muse spiraled into addiction after relying on pain pills following his surgery. And Pam Trusty feels lucky to be alive. However, Dunch's legal team claimed that he was not a criminal, just a lousy surgeon and a lazy person. They said him committing malpractice was due to chaotic operating rooms in hospitals in Dallas. And as for the emails he wrote to his ex-girlfriend Kimberly saying he would become a killer, they said it was simply sarcasm taken badly. Even his lead attorney said, "You have people in walkers, you have people on crutches, you have people that could barely move. You had people that had lost loved ones. You had all sorts of things that had gone wrong. Before we even get to Mary, you can see that it's going downhill. I mean, it's going downhill fast. So why didn't he stop?" Michelle asked. "Because of greed. Because he owed people a lot of money. He wanted to live the high life, and a neurosurgeon makes big bucks. Why didn't he stop? Because he had no conscience. He doesn't care what he has left in his wake." In court, Dunch was calm and collected. His lawyer later said he truly and honestly thought he was doing a good job, and this all seemed shocking to him. He said until the experts started speaking, it seemed he was clueless as to the damage he caused. The jury took just 4 hours to return their verdicts. In July 2016, he was found guilty of 1 count of intentionally or knowingly causing serious bodily harm to an elderly individual. Dunch's family begged for some mercy when it came to the sentencing. They described him as a bright little boy who had taken care of sick birds and loved dogs. They acknowledged his issues, but said everything he did came from a place of wanting to help people. His dad Don said, in February 2017, Christopher Dunch was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. He filed an appeal in 2018, but his conviction was upheld. He's not eligible for parole until 2045, when he will be 74 years old. This case set a huge precedent. It is the first time in the United States that a physician has been convicted of criminal charges for actions in the course of their medical work. In June 2023, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a bill into law that would give the state's medical board additional ability to protect patients from potentially dangerous doctors. The bill, HB 1998, was introduced in response to an investigation that found at least 49 doctors were practicing in Texas, despite having their licenses revoked in other states. To think about how many people these doctors were treating is shocking. There was no record of these actions on the Texas Medical Board's physician profile pages, despite being required by law. The new law includes several provisions which will better enable the board to protect patients and boost transparency. These include some of the following. Lying on a medical license application will be a Class A misdemeanor. Doctors who have had their medical licenses revoked, restricted, or suspended in another state will not be allowed to practice in Texas. All doctors will be required to be fingerprinted as part of a criminal background check and be monitored monthly via the National Practitioner Data Bank. The 4 hospitals that employed Dunch have ongoing civil cases against them as well. Sadly, not reporting these things is not uncommon. In 2011, a staggering 47% of hospitals did not report their restrictions or revocations of doctors' clinical privileges, leaving the doors wide open for the lack of paper trail to be taken advantage of. Questions had to be answered, and accountability had to be taken. It highlighted the systemic problems within the healthcare field all the way to the top. The hospital officials which allowed him to leave rather than firing him and having him investigated issued a statement which read, "Our primary concern, as always, is with patients. Out of respect for the patients and families involved, and the privileged nature of a number of details, we must continue to limit our comments. There is nothing more important to us than serving our community through high-quality, trusted healthcare." Trying to comprehend the amount of damage and destruction that Christopher Dunch has caused is impossible. Between May 2011 and June 2013, Dunch performed surgery on 38 people. 32 of them were left with life-changing injuries, in some cases completely paralyzed, and 2 had died. His case became quite a big part of mainstream media, with a hugely successful podcast being launched about it. And it was even made into a TV show on Peacock called Dr. Death. It was an all-star cast, with Joshua Jackson playing Dunch and Christian Slater playing Dr. Randall Kirby. And this brings us to the amazing doctors that helped put an end to his career. One has to wonder, if it wasn't for the perseverance of Dr. Kirby and Dr. Henderson, how much longer would Dunch have continued? Tragically, a third victim's life would be claimed when, in 2021, Jerry Summers, Dunch's patient and once dear friend, died from an infection connected to his botched surgery. We trust that when we need them, people in Christopher Dunch's position of authority, knowledge and power will look after us. They will care for us. They will make us better. We put our faith and trust in them, that they will turn things around even when the odds might seem stacked against us. We hope that we are in good and safe hands. The families that were affected by the crimes of Christopher Dunch, that trust will likely forever be broken. Kelly's husband Don Martin said, "My whole lifestyle has changed. Everything is different now. I look at life differently, totally differently. Life is too precious, too short. We can't take the little things for granted. We are just trying to make the best of each day." On December 18, 2018, partially buried skeletal human remains were discovered in a field near Ville Platte, Louisiana. The remains were located near an isolated, rarely used barn in the middle of a field. The discovery occurred while searchers were out looking for a missing 9-year-old boy named Bryson Tabado. Bryson was later found alive 12 days later, hiding at a neighbor's house, and his parents were arrested for cruelty to juveniles, and he and his sister were removed from the home. Forensic investigators determined the remains to be that of a mixed Cajun French and African American female, 25 to 35 years old, and had been partially buried for up to 10 years. Unable to match her to any missing persons reports, she became known as Evangeline Parrish Jane Doe 2018. After a painstaking DNA extraction by the DNA Doe Project, they were able to place a profile in GEDmatch nearly a year after her discovery. Through a collaborative effort, the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab, the LSU Forensic Anthropology and Computer Enhancement Services Laboratory, and DNA Doe Project were able to identify the Jane Doe. On February 5, 2021, the Louisiana State Police announced that Evangeline Parrish Jane Doe 2018 had been identified as Erica Nicole Hunt. Erica was born July 10, 1995 to Shane and Isaac. She was described as lively, energetic, and always smiling, and had 2 sisters that she was very close to. She had a 2-year-old daughter named Brianna and lived in Opelousas, Louisiana, just 12 miles away from where she was found. She had plans to celebrate her upcoming 21st birthday a week after she disappeared. On July 3, 2016, 20-year-old Erica and her little girl attended a barbecue at her uncle's house for the holiday. The next day, Erica stopped by her sister's house and hung out for a bit. She borrowed a few dollars for cigarettes and then left. She didn't own her own vehicle and usually asked for a ride, but this time she didn't. So when she left, her family wasn't sure if she left on foot or if she was picked up by someone. But the next day, July 5th, she was not answering any calls or texts and had not picked up her daughter from her mother's house, which was very unusual for her. A day later, her family would report her missing. During the initial search for Erica, police got a tip that she had been seen on the July 4th, 2016 behind Billy Ray's Food and a local restaurant between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., and then another sighting a few blocks from there on Madison Street. But police told the media they weren't completely sure these sightings were credible. Erica's family immediately began making missing person flyers, and for years her family searched, but they never found any further traces of her. At this time, her death is being investigated as a homicide. On April 11, 2021, a Gwinnett County police officer responded to a complaint of trash dumping in a wooded area just off Hamilton Road in Beaufort, Georgia. When the officer arrived, He found a makeshift campsite and a tent, and upon further investigation, discovered a human skull. No other human bones were recovered by authorities despite a thorough search of the 13-acre area. Forensic investigators could not determine much about the remains other than they were that of an 18 to 30-year-old woman. A cause and manner of death could not be determined at the time, and she would become known as Gwinnett County Jane Doe or Beaufort Jane Doe. The medical examiner indicated the remains could have been in the woods for at least 1 year. Unable to easily match the skull to any local missing person cases, Law Enforcement commissioned forensic artist Kelly Lawson to make a reconstruction of the woman, hoping to generate leads. She underwent testing by the DNA Doe Project, but was identified before a genetic profile was completed. A DNA match had been obtained between the Jane Doe and a reference sample from a family member. The identification of Brittany Michelle Davis was announced on August 26, 2021, when her fiancé was taken into custody in connection with her death. Based on evidence obtained during the investigation, detectives had probable cause to charge 42-year-old Michael Lee Wilkerson with the murder of Brittany. The couple had been living together on McDaniel Avenue in Greenville, South Carolina, when she went missing. Brittany was only 32 years old when she was last seen on February of 2020 at Buck's Racks and Ribs in Greenville. Some reports contradict this and say that she was last seen being dropped off at her apartment by an Uber driver on February 12, 2020. Worked at Firebird's Woodfire Grill off Woodruff Road, but she never showed up for work. Her mother, Melanie Hollerman, said she was strangely getting texts from Brittany's phone through the month of February and into March. One of the last text messages she got from Brittany's phone was about her returning from a trip to Puerto Rico. However, she later learned that Brittany never went on a trip to Puerto Rico. It is believed that Wilkerson was sending those texts pretending to be Brittany. Her phone was powered off on March 10, 2020, and all social media accounts were deactivated. It is believed that she was killed on or around February 12, 2020, and her mother reported her missing on March 16, 2020. Sadly, Brittany was described as a beautiful soul with a good heart. Police have not released details about her case, but as of today, Wilkerson remains behind bars. On August 5, 1988, human remains were discovered by a fisherman along Beaver Creek in the Willow Sloat State Fish and Wildlife Area in Morocco, Indiana. It was determined that the remains were those of a black female between the ages of 25 and 45 years old. Filled with the body were a pair of Jordache jeans and a safety pin stamped with the number 450. It was later believed that the safety pin was possibly from a Morocco swimming pool. Also with her was a number from an old police report case. She was found underneath the remains of another individual identified as Celeste Tony Sherrod. The bodies of Tony and the woman had been in the same forest and swamp area on the Indiana-Illinois state line where Chicago mob boss Anthony Spilatro and his brother Michael were found slain in a shallow grave in June 1986, 2 years earlier. Authorities speculated that the area was being used as a burial ground by organized crime figures from Chicago. 31-year-old Tony was married to Cynthia Sherrod and was a native of Chicago and had spoken to his father a month earlier around the 4th of July, 1988. His Chevrolet Astro van was found several days later 3 miles away in Indiana, also burned. However, he wasn't reported missing until months after he was last seen, and his family said he was on the road for weeks at a time as a truck driver. Cynthia said she last seen her husband in May of 1988, about 3 months before he was found. Police reports noted that Tony had an extensive criminal history and numerous girlfriends. Unable to determine the female's identity, she became known as Charlene Doe, Newton County, 1988. Years later, a cold case detective presented part of a tooth to a dentist, which was determined to have been an expensive dental crown. He sent the school to Betsy Cooper, a forensic artist, and she created a sketch of what the female may have looked like while alive. In 2019, the DNA Doe Project began trying to identify her using genetic genealogy. DNA extract was obtained from UNT Center for Human Identification, and in March 2020, the DNA was sent to Hudson Alpha Discovery for whole genome sequencing. After data was obtained, bioinformatics work was performed by Sabre Investigations to produce a file suitable for upload to genealogical databases. On May 7, 2020, The file was uploaded to GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA, and the top matches were distant cousins, which represented both parents. On March 5, 2021, 33 years later, the Newton County, Indiana Coroner's Office positively identified the Jane Doe as that of Jennifer Noreen Denton from Joliet, Illinois. Jennifer Denton was born in 1963 and was 24 years old when she went missing from her home. She left behind her 1-year-old daughter and all of her personal belongings. Her sister had tried to file a missing persons report at the time, but the Joliet Police Department refused due to Jennifer being an adult. This is still an open investigation, and there are no further details available on the case at this time. On January 11, 2015, the decomposed remains of a man were found in a shed in Mill Creek, Washington, along with $20. He was found lying under blankets on a mattress made of pieces of foam and was thought to be living there. Investigators believed he had been dead for at least a year before he was found. The man was determined to be African American, between 50 and 65 years old, and the tip of his pinky finger on his right hand was missing. Unable to determine the deceased man's identity, he became known as Mill Creek Shedman. No cause of death could be determined, but there were also no signs of foul play. There is local lore that states he had permission to live in the shed from a man who once owned the property. Locals said a man named Jerry Diggs, or Deggs, lived in the shed for decades and had said his birth date was December 31, 1949. He claimed to be from the East Coast and used to work as a security guard for a bank. He stated that he was struck in the head during a bank robbery and received a head injury. DNA from the remains had been entered into Cody's in 2015, but there were no matches. Investigators tried to determine the man's name and even asked the State Department of Social and Health Services to look for records of food stamps that could be linked to him, but there was no evidence he ever used them. A forensic dentist compared the man's teeth to those of missing people, but he struggled to narrow down a list of possibilities. In early 2018, a new DNA sample was extracted from the man's femur to be used by the DNA Doe Project. The genetic profile was uploaded to GEDmatch and genealogists began working on a family tree. On December 23, 2019, the Snohomish County Medical Examiner announced Mill Creek Shedman's identity as Nathaniel Terrence Deggs, who went by the name Terry. He was 65 years old at the time of his death and was eventually confirmed by DNA submitted by his sister. He was born Nathaniel Terrence Davies on December 31, 1949 in Baltimore, Maryland, to a teenage mother, and would later have over a dozen siblings. As a child, he was taken in by a foster mom whose last name was Daggs, and they lived in the Bronx, New York. He did indeed work as a security guard in a bank in the Bronx. His foster mother passed away in 1984, and he was reportedly extremely upset by this loss and showed up in Mill Creek in 1985. His family searched for him over the years, and it's unknown how or why he ended up in the isolated area. The story goes that a dentist from Mill Creek found Terry emaciated and staying in a falling-apart barn near his home in the 17,500 block of Bethel Everett Highway in October 1985. However, he became known as Jerry instead of Terry. He began living in the shed about 200 feet behind the man and his family's home and sometimes cooked for them. He became reclusive, rarely venturing out from the shed. Years later, in 1996, another man began renting the home and was aware of Terry living in the backyard shed. He said Terry often made childlike sketches of his surroundings and appeared kind of slow. He said he would bring him plates of food on the holidays. He said one day a small fire broke out on the roof and firefighters would no longer allow him to keep his wood stove. So the homeowner gave him an electric skillet and a small heater, and ran the power cords out of his home business. Often ate potatoes and lived off the 6 acres picking fruit from the trees. The homeowner eventually moved out, and after that, Jerry was often seen walking along the nearby highway. Police had talked to him several times and had written his name and date of birth down at least once. Initial testing by DNA Doe Project was unsuccessful, so they attempted a second round of sequencing. Paid for through fundraising efforts, which was successful in extracting a usable sequence. The results were uploaded to GEDmatch, and fortunately, a woman had uploaded her DNA to GEDmatch and opted in to share with law enforcement. It turned out she was a match, and she was identified as the man's half-first cousin. Genealogists were able to build a family tree, which revealed that she and the unidentified man shared a grandfather. Through her, the DNA Doe Project team continued to reconstruct the man's family tree and found his half-siblings. His sister provided details about the man's life, confirming the link to the man living in the Mill Creek shed. His sister said she did have a brother called Terry and his real name was Nathaniel, and his family hadn't seen him since the late 70s to early 80s. The family had hired a private detective at one point and tried their own internet searches. In public records, the name Terry or Jerry or even Nathaniel Deggs are difficult to find. One relative had his social security number, but it proved to be little to no help. His birth certificate still has not been found, and that particular year was missing in Baltimore's public records when investigators went looking for it. One obituary of a brother in 2017 listed him as a survivor and called him Nathaniel Davey. Another obituary gave the last name Davis. Since then, some family members have suggested it was a combination of the two. In spite of the confusion, if his siblings hadn't published those names, researchers would still be guessing according to the genealogist. The DNA Doe Project volunteered over nearly 2,000 hours in search of the name, affixing thousands of branches to hundreds of family trees. Once the genealogist had the half-cousin's name, she was able to discover pieces of his ancestry which led her to the obituaries and ultimately to his real identity. The family has made plans to move Terry's remains closer to New York. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.